Good day, my SM viewers. This is Satellite Media. This one is coming from Simon Ekpa's lawyer, saying Simon Ekpa's lawyer responds to extradition reports amid legal battle in Finland. The report is saying that he's refuting the earlier claim that Simon Ekpa was approved to be extradited to Nigeria by a Finnish court. Let me quickly say that I'm not surprised, because looking at the legal framework, looking at Finland laws and European Convention on Human Rights, you see that it's nearly impossible to extradite Simon Ekpa from Finland to Nigeria. Because number one, Simon Ekpa is a Finnish citizen. Of course, we understand that in the build-up to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, when Finland applied to join NATO and Turkey opposite, that is the situation where Turkey applied to Finland to extradite some of their citizens who are in Finland. But in response, Finland made it abundantly clear to Turkey that if you are seeking to extradite your citizens who are in our country, that European Union Convention on Human Rights forbids any European Union member country to extradite a citizen of their country to any other country that has history of human rights violation. So in the same vein, we understand that Nigeria have poor record when it comes to human rights. There are so many areas where Nigerian government have not even obeyed a valid court order. We have seen that in different places. And again, look at the fact that even Simon Ekpa himself have since renounced his Nigerian citizenship. So you begin to ask, if you were to extradite him, will you be extraditing someone to a country where he have already renounced his citizenship? Of course, he had made it very clear when he said he's no longer a Nigerian, when he renounced his Nigerian citizenship, and even sent the medals he won on behalf of Nigeria in the past back to Nigeria. And that is still on record. So if you want to extradite him, how can you now bring him to a country where he have renounced his citizenship? That is another thing. Then again, we're equally looking at perhaps the extradition treaty. Because for you to even initiate the process of extradition, you must enjoy extradition treaty with the country where you hope to extradite that person to. Just like we saw in the case of Nnamdi Kanu, of course, it had been established that that was extraordinary rendition done by Kenya and Nigerian government. A situation where Nnamdi Kanu was abducted from Kenya to Nigeria without due process. So this time around, if you are to initiate the extradition process of Simon Ekpa from Finland to Nigeria, do Nigeria enjoy extradition treaty with Finland? Of course, obviously no. However, Finland, on their own discretion, can decide to do extradition process even when there is no such treaty. But it has to be within the discretion of Finland. And even at that, looking at European Convention on Human Rights that forbid European member countries to extradite their citizens to a country that have history of human rights violation, that have poor record of human rights. Of course, that's a big hurdle for Nigeria. I cited the other day the case of Dasuki versus Nigerian government, where court gave judgment in favor of Dasuki and the federal government of Nigeria never obeyed it. There are some instances where court will give order against the government and the government will refuse to obey it, even when the government, or rather the person involved, will go back to court to obtain a garnishing order to compel the government to obey an initial order. You find out that in most cases, the government still flouts it. So when you have such situation, it is going to be a Herculean task on the part of Nigerian government to argue such extradition, because the records are there. Of course, Simon Ekpa's lawyer and his legal team will equally lash on it. Then even when you even look at Nnamdi Kanu's case, particularly with reference to the judgment of the Court of Appeal here in Nigeria, that ruled that Nnamdi Kanu was extraordinary rendition. As such, he should be released unconditionally. It is not on record that Nigerian government secured a stay of execution of that judgment to have warranted keeping Nnamdi Kanu, not allowing him to enjoy that judgment. Because as we speak, it's not on record that Nnamdi Kanu was released after that judgment. Even when the federal government went to Supreme Court to when Supreme Court have to rule that the case should go and start afresh. But the question is, before we got to the point where the Supreme Court made pronouncements, it's on record that the federal government did not secure a stay of execution. So why is it that Nnamdi Kanu never enjoyed that judgment? Of course, the best explanation is impunity. The best reason you can explain the reason they did not allow him to enjoy that judgment is impunity. Is because the government is not submitted to rule of law. So when you have this situation in hand, and you are having someone who you seek to extradite, even in the face of non-existent extradition treaty, even in the face of Simon Ekpa himself being a Finnish citizen, even in the face of Simon Ekpa himself having renounced his Nigerian citizenship. So you begin to wonder, how do they hope to achieve this? So I'm of the view that the government of Nigeria should seek for ways to engage every agitator, every agitating group, whether the Oduduwa Republic agitators, whether Biafra Republic agitators. They should have a way to engage them and constructively look at whether there should be need for a referendum. And of course, if you ask me, I would say that is the way to go, because it has been established that coercion, brute force, kinetic approach, litigation is not deterring anyone or deterring the agitators from going ahead or rather forging ahead with the agitation. So under this circumstance, the best option is to have a referendum and let the government go and canvass a supreme opinion, if they have any, why they think the people should remain in this entity called Nigeria. And at the end of the day, if people who say they want to remain are in the majority, of course, that will put an end to anything agitation, and it will even put to shame those who have been agitating that they want to exit the country. Because if you look at Nigeria, the way it was amalgamated, the British government that amalgamated Nigeria never take into consideration that these are different people by providence. It doesn't matter the opinion of the British government. The Igbos are different from the Hausas are different from Yoruba, and the same thing is applicable to all other ethnic minorities in the country. However, it is not out of place for people of different language, culture, by providence to come together as a one nation, but it has to be through unanimous agreement, not the current situation we have where everybody is coerced by the coercive power of Nigerian states without their consent. So, because you go and look at the constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the grand norm, in the preamble, it will tell you that we, the people of Nigeria, came together to write that constitution. And there's never in the history of this country that the people of Nigeria unanimously came together to write that constitution. So, on its own, that on its own is the highest level of fraud. And anytime people agitate for a people's oriented constitution, the ruling class, the political class have a way of frustrating it, and that has since made people feel more disillusioned and want to exit the country. The other time we saw Sunday Igboho and his followers went to Britain to submit a letter to the British Prime Minister's office seeking to exit Nigeria, even though the British High Commission in Nigeria here advised Sunday Igboho and his likes to join hands with other Nigerians to move Nigeria forward. But I would say that is not in the place to say, because we understand that at the time they exited the European Union, the British citizens themselves, they had people who were against it and they had people who were for it. But at the end of the day, those in the minority had their say, while the majority had their way, and today they have already exited the European Union. In the same vein, it is not in their position or in their place to start asking people to remain in this entity called Nigeria, because in the first place, what conscious effort are they making to encourage the leaders of Nigeria to do the right thing in terms of good management of resources we have, in terms of good leadership. Of course, that is lacking. And if you look at almost every area of life, you see that the ruling class is subjugating the poor. And if you ask me, I would say that's the bane of people being disillusioned with the system and wanting to secede from the country. Let me say very big thank you for your time. This is Sadlam Dynamics so much.